G'day fellow flight simmers and random YouTubers. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to go about flight planning in Australia. As a member of VATSIM and also VATPAC and a regular online ATC person, I really get frustrated about the lack of knowledge as far as online pilots knowing how to do a proper flight plan. So and I'm not picking on anyone, especially people from the US or other countries. They really don't have much of a clue about how to flight plan. So hopefully today I'll be able to clear up some mysteries about flight planning, and so we'll jump straight in. Now, the first place to look for when you're trying to find a flight plan to fly in Australia is this place right here. Okay, it's called VATPAC, and where you want to go under pilot links and pilot assist. And once you get to this page here, you can either use the drop down or you can use the ICAO. So for the purposes, if you don't know, we'll start off with we'll go from Sydney to Melbourne, which is a very popular route that a lot of people fly. Okay, and click find routes. Now you'll see here you've got three alternative routes. The first one here is under aircraft. You see prop. Now this particular route is for turboprop aircraft, and the other two are for the jet aircraft. Now if I was to select for that one there, what I would get here would be, I fly the McDonnell Douglas MD-11, but you pick, you can choose Boeing 737 or whatever. It's up to you. Fill in this. Now, when we're, you can either file it with VATSIM, and it does that, and it gives you all the details. So. And what I find a lot of the times is people don't know how to fill in this aircraft type special equipment. So this is VATSIM basically, it does it all for you. And the only thing you have to fill in is your pilot's name, VATSIM ID, password, and file it with VATSIM. And then what you can do, you can highlight that, copy that, and bring it into your pilot client, whether it's Squawk Box or FSN or vPilot, and then just copy that in, and you're basically done. Now, a lot of people have problems actually identifying or what this actually means. So what I like to do is I go to another software called SkyVector. And what this does, if you can type in what our route is going to be, we'll get rid of all this because I've been doing some other stuff on it. Working out what's going on here. Trying to calculate the... Okay. So what it does is, of course, it draws a straight line. Now if we go up to Sydney these days, I don't know if you can see that, but the waypoint now is called TSAT, which is very much what that's saying, TSAT along the H65 RASI. Now, people often wonder, or I guess yes, people often wonder how the air traffic controllers work out what SIDS and stars, or how they work out the SIDS and stars. And I guess it's something that the pilots don't really worry about. All they do is, of course, they just select the runway they take off with and select the appropriate SID. and that's basically it. But from an air traffic control point of view, if we go back to ATC and we go to ATC Assist, and we try to work out how does an ATC work out what SID the pilot basically needs. So if we set the site as Sydney, and what we have here is basically all the information regarding Sydney, the runways that Sydney has, and we've got arrivals and departures, and you've got all these waypoints here. So you can see for the arrivals, which is pink, corresponds to these pink waypoints. Now these pink waypoints are basically entry fixes for all Sydney arrivals. So, and the green is obviously departure waypoints, and these are in our case here we're departing Sydney TSAT along the H65. So if I go first of all, if ATC has determined that 34 left and 34 right, and probably by looking at the MERTA you have a look at the winds are 350 degrees at 7 knots. So say for example ATC have decided that the arrivals and departures are 34 left and 34 right. So going back to this, we're going along the H65 airway. So if we click, these are all the airways that come into and out of Sydney. So if we click H65, we can see for a jet aircraft, oh that's another thing. Now if we're flying a jet, these are the applicable SIDs, and of course you can see the stars. Now you have a look at it. For example, the Wollongong SID corresponds to, see how these highlighted green, and Wollongong is a fix, a departure fix, and the same for Marib. And you can see the Marib 5 is only applicable to 34 right with the Wollongong transition, and the Wollongong 1 departure is only applicable for the runway 34 left. So now what happens if we're flying, let's say, a Dash 400 or a Beech Baron, a turboprop aircraft, and we go along and we select the Wollongong entry point, we can see now for a turboprop that the Wollongong 1 departure is no longer applicable. You can see now that for a turboprop, the Glenfield 7 departure with the Wollongong transition is now applicable. Okay, so we'll go back and we'll have a look what that basically means. So if we grab our route here and we go and we drag it with the left mouse button and we keep it and we drag it over here and we plan for Wollongong, it says our Sky Vector says Cliff 4. Well, Sky Vector is a brilliant program, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic, but sometimes it gets it wrong. Now, whether it hasn't updated its database or whatever, because we could see with jet aircraft, we've got here, that's the SID. See how there's a different colour to Wollongong? So that there is the SID that they reckon. But we've seen that it's either the Wollongong 1 or the Glenfield 7, as we saw back here, depending on which aircraft you fly. So if we have a look, yeah. Anyhow, so now by looking at this flight plan, we can see that it goes from H65 along Razzie, along Q29 into Melbourne. So from here it goes along the 29 to Razzie. So we flight plan for that. Oh, sorry, big boo-boo. We should be on the high airways. We can see 865 on the long. And we can see along the Q29, which is an airways route that basically goes one way by that arrow there. So it goes in and it goes direct to Melbourne. Now we think, well, what do we do, you know, along this Q29? If we put it onto Lizzie, plan to Lizzie, it changes into this and it gives us this indication. So what this is saying is Sky Vector's telling it, now this is, you can expect the Lizzie 2 Alpha arrival. Well, is this right? So what we can do is we can now check. We set that to Melbourne, and before we get into Melbourne, if we're flying into Melbourne, we obviously tune in our ATIS, and the ATIS might say on this particular day, if we have a look at these winds here, it's saying for 230 at 20 knots. So say for argument's sake they decide to have runway 27 for arrival and departures, even though in the real world they might have runway 27 arrivals and runway 16 departures because of the traffic load, etc. But let's just say we're using 27. So as I've explained earlier, you can see that with the pink here, which means arrivals, these are all the arrival waypoints that come into Melbourne. So if I was to pick Lizzie, sure enough, Lizzie 2 Alpha and Lizzie 2 Zulu. Now these are obviously different. These SIDs terminate in different approaches. Like if it's a Lizzie 2 Alpha arrival, your approach ends up being an ILS on runway 27, whereas Lizzie 2 Zulu is a different type of approach. So you've got to be aware of that. So, and if we have a look at the Lizzie 2 Alpha arrival for runway 27, you can see from Lizzie we're tracking 225 degrees, and at or below 9,000 at matey I should say, and then you turn on the 251, you're tracking 251, and then you get to Epping, and then you're on for the ILS runway 27. So you can see that when it's a 2 Alpha, and as we saw by our trusty Sky Vector, it got it right this time. So basically you can see in conjunction with Sky Vector and ATC Assist, this is called ATC Assist, which is, you have a look under here, and Pilot Assist, you can basically fill in or do a flight plan that's 100% correct in Australian airspace. Now, let's say if we go back to Pilot Assist, and let's say we want to go, now instead of say from Sydney to Melbourne, let's say we go from, let's say we go from Mildura, and we want to go to Sydney. Find the routes, and what do you know? No matching routes found. So what do we do? How do we find a route that's most appropriate? Now Mildura is a it's in what they call a CTAF, and it's a regional type of airport. So there's another brilliant site called Flight Aware, and you can find actual real flights flown in real time by real airlines under here called Flight Finder. So if we know the ICAO, which is Mildura, and we go to YSSY, which is Sydney, and we search, we can see that several airlines fly that actual route. One of them is Regional Express Airways, the other one is Qantas Link, Q-link. And let's say we click on that one here, waiting, and let's see if we can find an actual real flight plan. Now this basically gives you all that information for that particular flight, left Mildura, blah blah blah, and when it's arriving, and all that sort of stuff. But what we're interested in is down here. This is the actual flight plan that it filed. So if we go to SkyVector and we type in all the relevant information, get rid of all that. We don't need that anymore. Waiting. Sometime this week. Doesn't like it. Okay, finally got there. Okay, so going back to region. Okay, so we have a look at, it goes direct Mildura along the W451. Now we can see here we haven't got W451 because we're in the world high charts. But if we click on the world low charts, we get W451. Now these 2,200, that's the minimum safe altitude that you can fly if you're going to fly on that leg from Mildura to Levox, and then once again 2,200. So we can see from our flight plan, or from this particular flight plan, we flew along the W51 to GTH. And GTH is, there it is there, Griffith. Now you got the Griffith NDB, which is these brown dots, and then you got the Griffith VOR. We want a flight plan for the Griffith VOR, which is that. And then from the Griffith VOR, we saw it went along the V300 airway, and it went to Binduk, which is BIK. So we grab this and we go, right plan there, Binduk. So now we know it's the V300 airway to Binduk, and from Binduk we're making an approach along the W113 airway into Sydney. Now, if you're flying, for example, a Dash 8, you think to yourself, well, what star clearance do I expect air traffic control to give me? And this you can all do. You can basically do, you can pre-program all into your FMC. If you're flying, let's say you don't have our ATC available, but you want to know what would be a real world star, well, you go to the Sydney map or the Sydney ATC assist page, and you think W113, if we had a look, it was the W113 airways that leads us into Sydney. So okay, so we look at all these airways, and there it is there, W113. If I click that, if I'm flying my Dash 8, which is a turboprop, the O'Dale 5 is the star clearance for me. I can expect an O'Dale 5 arrival. And actually, the O'Dale 5 arrival is, as you can see, from O'Dale, you're tracking 063, and basically you get to the Glenfield NDB, and from there you're given vectors to the appropriate runway. Now, if we're on runway 34 left and 34 right, in our case, air traffic control would vector us for the finals or for the initial approach fix for the ILS on runway 34 left. So you can see that the O'Dale 5 is an appropriate star coming in on this particular route. Now, if I was a jet aircraft, for example, and H113, the O'Dale 5 is still relevant. I can still come in on an O'Dale 5 arrival. Okay, and if we go back to Sky Vector, and we actually, you can see O'Dale here. If I plan this and I actually click there, I'll plan it. Actually, Sky Vector works it out, that the O'Dale 5. So sometimes Sky Vector gets it right, but don't believe everything Sky Vector says. As I've explained to you, using this ATC assist, this confirms whether Sky Vector is right or wrong. So you can see basically in this real world flight that this is an appropriate route to come into coming into Sydney. I think that's basically it for me. I think I've covered everything I wanted to. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave your responses. I hope you enjoy many hours of flying, and I hope your flight planning is up to scratch. See you later.